gamers. Today we're going to be talking about a video that I get asked somewhat frequently, and I feel like making a video for all three things would be maybe the best thing to do. So the thing we're going to be discussing today is how to play versus two town center builds or play styles, how to play versus fast castle, and how to play against aggro strats or pro scouting or whatever else. So in general, this is the rule that follows RTS games. Okay, this is the rule that follows most RTS games, which means if you're going for an economy build, you're beating teching build. If you're going for teching build, you're beating an army build. And then if you're going army, which in this case is going to be all in, you're beating the eco build. So this is something that's always existed. So this would be like 2TC, this would be fast castle strat, and this would be like a feudal all-in, right? So you kind of get it. This kind of holds somewhat true for AOE4, but not really. So I wanted to explain to you guys how to play against all of these strategies individual. So if you're doing a two town center build, or actually if you're playing against two town center build, what you want to do is, depending on what you're doing, you have always two options, sometimes three. So let's say you're playing against 2TC. We'll focus on that first. So how do you play against two town center build? Well, if you are doing a two town center build yourself, you have two options. You can either go for two town center into a third TC maybe, and you outgreed your opponent. So playing against 2TC, okay, you can either go for, let's say, 3TC and try to outgreed your opponent, or you can go for 2TC into fast castle. Okay, FC is fast castle. That's 2TC versus 2TC. Let me just put it right here. This is going to be like a class right here. 2TC versus 2TC. In my opinion, these are the only two viable options and the best options. The reason for that is if you go for 2TC and your opponent goes 2TC and then you try to make army, it's already too late. And the opponent can do either one of these two and get out ahead. So if you're playing an economy build, a macro build, your opponent is doing the same, either you try to outgreed them by going triple TC, and that way you gain an advantage, or you also stay on 2TC and you do fast castle with almost no units or no units at all in order to try and get relics and secure the relics and play on the game from there on out. If you're playing against fast castle, if you're playing against 2TC, as let's say 2TC versus you're playing against your FC. So what do you do in this case? How to play against 2TC. If you're going fast castle, let's take an example of Japanese or HRE. You're fast castling with those and you're playing against 2TC English or something like that. Same thing follows. You have usually two choices. Because you're already deciding that you're going fast castle, this is you, obviously. I'm going to circle the U part. If you're playing against 2TC and you're doing fast castle, again, you have two options. Either you will go fast castle and then get the relics, right? That's what you focus on. And you get sacred sites plus second TC. This is the most common response that you see 2TC versus fast castle. The reason for that is the fast castling player is behind an economy, but by getting the relics and sacred sites and then following it up with second TC, you kind of catch up economically and the game plays on. This is the most common at the top level. Now, the second option, which is also very viable and very possible, is depending on which civ you're playing against, what you can do is you can do fast castle into an all-in. So that all-in is something that you've probably seen a billion times where, let's say, Japanese ages up to castle, the opponent is feudal age, and the opponent is making some units slowly edging up to castle 2. You go mounted samurai, and then you follow it up with a bunch of archers, right? So you're basically going mounted samurai archers, and you're just trying to end the game right then and there. So these are the two best responses you can do against two town center as fast castle player. Now, there is a third option sometimes, but that depends on which civ you are, which is fast imp. So this is also a possibility that you can do. And this works for civs like HRE, OTD, Mongol with Kaganat Palace, Delhi with the landmark that produces elephants. So any civilization that can get something very, very good in Imperial is something that you can go for, but obviously it doesn't apply to all the civilizations. Next thing, 2TC versus Feudal. So 2TC versus Feudal Age is, somewhat obvious, right? But we'll cover it. Feudal All-In, I guess. So if you're Feudal All-Inning, how do you attack 2TC? So this might be like, well, obviously you just attack the second town center. Well, there's actually two ways to play this. The one way to play against this is just do an all-in on attack their food, right? So it's super all-in, you stay in Feudal forever, and you just go for their attack second TC, right? So second TC or food. So you just fully commit. So let's say you're French, and this can be with pro scouting or without pro scouting. So you make knights, you make archers, you make rams, and you're going for it. You want to end the game, right? That's one way to play the game if you're playing a Feudal Age versus 2 Town Center. The second option is something that's very popular at the top level, which is actually not all in. Even though you're in Feudal and even though you're committing to Feudal a lot, you're not actually all-inning in Feudal, you're all-inning in Castle. So hear me out. So this one, you just commit fully units. You're just cranking knights, cranking archers. You don't think about aging up. You don't think about adding a second town center. The only thing you want to do is end the game. This one, on the other hand, is something like you go for, I'm going to put 10k, 10 knights, plus about 15 archers, let's say. And then you kind of circle around. You go around their defenses, you're poking the wood line, you're poking the gold, you're poking the food, whatever you can, you try to deny it. Meanwhile, you're on the boar, you're on the deer, you're chilling. And your goal is actually not to end the game in Feudal Age. Your goal is to force your opponent heavily into Feudal Age so that you can go castle or fast castle after. It's not fast castle, just go castle after that, and then upgrade all your units. And now these units, instead of having 10 knights, 15 archers, at this point you would have probably 15, 20 knights and 25, 30 archers that are castle upgraded. You upgrade them and you just go for it, okay? So this is something that is very, very popular at the top level because players have gotten very good at defending against these kinds of Feudal all-ins. So what people do is they put themselves in a good position with some raiding, with some harassment, being annoying. And then the idea behind this one is your opponent doesn't know, if you manage to kill the scout, for example, your opponent doesn't know that you are saving money to all-in or to go castle and then all-in. What they're thinking is, oh my god, I'm 2TC, I'm gonna die, I need to make units ASAP. And because of that, they overcommit in Feudal Age units, and then once you age up, your army is just way better. So there it is. Now, both of these styles are completely okay to do. One is not better than the other one. You can do both of them, okay? Fast Castle. How do you play against Fast Castle as 2 Town Center, okay? So these are some things to note, and these are some things to pay attention to. So you are in this case playing 2 Town Center, so how do you play against this? This is a lot trickier than from Fast Castle point of view. Defensive playstyles are usually a lot trickier to figure out and to play correctly than the aggressive playstyles. Aggressive playstyles have A to B, and you just do it, and that's it. The opponent needs to react to you. Now, if your opponent is fast castling, let's say, again, they're HRE or Japanese, and you're playing the 2 Town Center build, you have two options, okay? One option is you go 2TC straight into castle. So 2TC fast castle. The idea behind this is if you stay in 2TC for too long, you might get caught and you might lose against the fast castle into all-in playstyle, which is like the mounted samurai archers. So the idea is, it is greedy, but if executed properly, you can get into fast castle, and as long as you hold on just for a little bit, you will be in a good spot because you have a lot more workers. Now, the downside of this, the opponent gets the relics, but it is what it is, right? Because you went 2TC, you kind of give up some of the relics, but you have more workers. Now, this is very popular, and you have seen this many times with English, for example. So the 2TC standard Abbey of Kings English build is you go to town center, and then you gather deer, you gather gold, you gather food, and you go into the fast castle with white tower, and then you use white tower to kind of stabilize yourself. So some civs can do that, but obviously not every civ can do that. For example, Abbasid. So Abbasid, yes, you can do the fast castle thing with Abbasid, but obviously you cannot speed up your age up, and aging up to castle doesn't give you white tower to defend you. So there's a second option. By the way, there's some drilling going on. I hope it's not too loud, but yeah. So the second option that you can do as 2TC versus fast castle, and this is depending, in my opinion, on which civ you're playing. So if you're playing English, you can do something like this and you can be more than fine. Or if you're playing Order of the Dragon, you can do something like this. But if you're playing a civilization that has knights or has some kind of unique unit that can deal with castle units somewhat effectively, you can go for 2TC into army, okay? And the goal is to deny relics, and you basically play this weird game where you're going to TC, but you actually want to fight and keep your opponent in their base and not let them get relics, because your economy is growing and growing and growing. And remember how I said the fast castle build gets the relics and sacred sites to keep up with the economy? Well, if you manage to deny that, then you're ahead, even though you're feudal versus castle, and eventually you age up, right? Eventually, once you feel like you've done enough, you age up. Now, this is a bit riskier and it takes a lot more experience because you need to play it pretty well, but some civs kind of have to do that. Now, the civs that do this are civilizations like French, JD. I'm sure you've seen people go, even at the top level, they go 2TC French into a lot of knights. And you're like, why don't they just age up? Well, feudal knights are actually pretty good against castle knights. So it's not like a feudal spearman versus man-at-arms from Castle Age where it's like super one-sided. Feudal knights can actually put up a very good fight against castle knights, and you have more economy, so you should have more knights. So playstyle that a civilization that would do this kind of playstyle would be French, JD, Abbasid with camel archers, for example. Ayubit can do this with desert raiders. Basically any civ that can kind of hold their own for a while in feudal, even though they're playing against castle units. Another civ that is like this, even though they don't do 2TC, they do cow boom, is Malian. So Malian, for example, if they go cow boom, they don't usually go naked fast castle. They usually make a lot of units and put pressure on the map and try to delay the opponent as much as possible. So if you're playing 2 town center, depending what kind of civ you're playing, these are the best two options that you can do. Next one is fast castle from your opponent, and you are playing fast castle too, okay? This usually turns into straight up who's going to get more relics. It's as simple as that. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with HRE versus HRE, which is basically you just rush castle as fast as you can and try to get the relics. Now, not every civ is that kind of a goblin for the relics, but you do want to get fast relic, or you want to get relics as fast as possible. So this turns into most of the time it turns into fast castle and then mass knights. Now you might wonder, well, if they go mass knights, why don't I go for spearman crossbow? And this is something that is a question that I see pop up in like tournament chats when one player is making mass knights and the other player is making mass knights, and someone is like, well, wouldn't they just win if they made some spearmen? Now, the reason you don't do this is if you're going knights, let's say I have 10 knights and then you have 6 knights and now you're making spearmen. I can get the relics a lot easier on the map, because if I catch your couple of spearmen on the map, or I catch your monk, or I catch your 6 knights with my 10 knights, you will not only lose those units, but you will potentially lose the game. So in fast castle versus fast castle, mobility is the king, okay? It's the best thing you can have. Now, you don't want to make knights until you have 50, but at least until you have about 15, 20, 25 knights, you want to stick with them, because not only it gives you raid potential, it allows you to escort the relics pretty quickly, and it allows you to deny the opponent's relics. So this is why when both players are doing a fast castle, it turns into mass knights versus mass knights. Not only that, when both players start running out of food, it is extremely easy to raid your opponent, and sometimes if you kill like 10 villagers, the game is just over. So that is option number one, and that is something that will happen more often than not. Now, the second playstyle that you can do, this is something honestly that's going to happen, like, or should happen the higher you go in leagues, more often than not. But second playstyle, and I think this is something that might be more popular in lower leagues, might be something along those lines of fast castle into like man-at-arms and just building a big army and then kind of going for the attack. But what you can also do is do a fast castle, try to get 1 or 2 relics, and then go into second TC very quickly into spear plus crossbow, right? If you're playing against HRE, you have to deny the relics. You cannot just get 1 or 2 and be like, okay, I'm good now, right? Because HRE relics are very strong. But if you're playing a civilization that's very good in late castle or imperial, you can actually say, you know what, I'm not going to commit to knights. I'm just going to get a relic or 2 that I can near my base. I'm going to get some spearman crossbow to escort that, and I'm going to go super fast second town center. So let's say you get 2 relics and your opponent gets 3 relics. But if you get a second TC a lot faster, you will still be in a very good spot, and 2 relics versus 3 relics is not that bad after all. And then if you do some walling or something, you'll be in a great spot. I would say this is probably a more popular option in lower leagues because using spearman crossbow is going to be a lot easier than handling mass knights, but realistically, these are your best 2 options. So I would say if you're playing a civilization like China or Jushi, which is actually what this is very popular with, is you get a relic or 2 and then you go spearman crossbow, and getting a second TC with Song Dynasty from China is very good and allows you to kind of boom up and transition from then on out, or even a civilization like Lancaster or civilization like English. If English, for some reason you play English and you go fast castle, you're going to have a lot better time transitioning into infantry and second TC than continuing to mass knights. Because there are some civs, like Japanese with mounted samurai, that they're very, very, very good with mounted samurai and very good in knight fights. So there's no reason for Japanese to do this, right? Because they're literally the best or one of the best civs to do this thing, right? So Japanese will most often do this kind of style where they're just massing knights and forcing into that kind of battle. But if you're playing more passive civs, you go for the second option. So if you're in Feudal Age and you're playing against a fast castle build, what are your 2 options? Option number 1 is actually both options are very, very similar to playing against 2 town center. So option number 1, if you're playing the feudal versus fast castle, is just super all in. This usually includes something like fast ram, right? Or even going for a tower rush on their gold. So tower rush on gold. So you might have seen this, you might have experienced this. It's not a tower rush in a dark age. You can do something like, let's say you're playing French and you're playing against HRE. The HRE has the tower on their gold. So what you can do is you make a knight and you bring a villager or 2, and then you put a tower on the side of their gold where the tower will not hit you, and then they're out of gold. So even if they age up, they can't use any gold anymore. So they're kind of stuck in castle and they spent all these resources and they can't do much. That's option number 1. Regarding this kind of all-in style, and then you just make units and you keep pressuring them. Option number 2, as far as this all-in goes, is to just go for, let's say, knight archer, horseman archer, man-at-arm archer, and go for super fast ram, and then your goal is to bust down the tower on the gold, because if the player ages up to castle and they have no gold, then they might as well be feudal. So this is kind of the whole idea behind it. So you're just super committed, you go for it, and you can pretty much prevent any fast castle strategy with a well-executed attack on their gold. Now, second option is, again, very similar to the response to 2TC. So what you can do is go for, let's say, mass, like only knights or only horses. So let's say cavalry on their gold. So you keep poking, maybe you get +1 ranged armor, you keep poking the gold, but your idea is actually not to commit an all-in. The whole point of this is to just delay their castle and then you go castle behind this. So you would, if you're, let's say, playing French, you would go for 6 to 8 knights with +1 upgrade, and then you go castle. So the idea behind this is you try to do something feudal, but you don't want to all in. Maybe you're not confident, maybe you just don't want to commit to a feudal all in completely. So the idea behind this is you can poke their wood villagers, you can poke their berry villagers, their gold villagers, you force them to garrison, you force them to run, but because you have +1 ranged armor, your knights are not taking as much damage. And then even if the opponent ages up, and now they're in castle, you still have 6 to 8 knights to kind of buy yourself time to harass, to attack their monk getting relics, or to fight their knights or whatever else. So that's kind of the two styles. Now, which one you should do depends on, again, which civ you are. If you're playing French and JD, this is very good to do with them. And this one with the Tower Rush on gold and a knight or two, right? If you're playing Abbasid or Ayubid, you can simply do extremely fast ram push if you don't want to play against fast castle. If you're playing against English, you obviously go for longbows, and you can deny their gold and then build a ram. So depending which civ you're playing, depending what your civ has, you kind of want to use that to your full potential. If you're playing HRE and you're playing as Japanese, you can just do a man-at-arm archer all in on their gold with fast rams, right? So that's kind of how that goes. And then last thing that we're going to be talking about is how to play against Feudal Age. So this is a very interesting one. Again, 2TC is a lot harder to react to stuff because you need to have very, very good scouting. Now, the first one is very obvious, and it's going to depend on what you scout. So scouting is extremely, extremely important in all of these, but especially doing the 2TC builds. So what do you do against Feudal All-In as 2 Town Center? If the opponent is super committing to this, your number one goal is to secure the food. No matter what you do, if you scout, okay, my opponent is all-inning. There's no transition, he's just going for it. There's a couple of things you gotta like do a little check mark. Check mark number one is make sure you have food so you can actually produce units. The longer the game goes, the better it is for you because you're getting more and more and more villagers. And as long as those villagers are gathering, you're getting further and further and further ahead, and you will have more and more units. The difference is early on he will have more units, but you have two town centers to garrison the villagers in. So secure the food, number one. Number two, make sure to get your upgrades over time. You don't need to rush these. You don't even need to rush eco upgrades, but make sure to get +1/+1, which is the ranged armor and ranged attack at a point. These are very important in feudal fights, and you will usually be defending with archers. So you need to make sure to get this. So do not get your gold blocked completely, and even if your gold gets blocked completely, you can always make a market and chop wood and maybe sell some wood in order to get that. Eco upgrades you can get if you're feeling like you're in a good spot. You don't need it in order to hold. As long as you hold the all-in, you're good to go. Number two thing that you need to secure is wood, okay? Food and wood are the most important things in order for you to hold this, because depending which civ you're playing against, so let's say you're playing against a knight civ or man-at-arms civ or spear archer civ or whatever, you're never going to be defending with gold units. You want to defend with wood and food units. Why? Because going for gold units is usually pretty greedy. Like if you're playing French and you're playing against English and you went 2 town centers, and English is all-inning you. I know it seems very good to go for knights to defend, but you should not be going knights actually. You should go horseman archer. The reason for that is you want as many units as possible, not the best quality units, because he will already have the numbers game on you. So if you go for a knight and he has 3 spearmen, 3 longbows, you're not killing anything. But if you go for horsemen, they're going to be a lot cheaper. They're actually a lot faster, allows you to intercept the units and allows you to pick off units here and there. And you can use that gold for your upgrades, which are going to be a lot better value. So if you're playing let's say HRE, you don't go men-at-arms to defend. You go either horseman archer, or you go spearman horseman, or spearman archer. So this kind of applies to pretty much every civilizations. You want to focus on the wood food villagers, units in order to defend that, and you want to use the gold for your upgrades. And all you care about is, as your economy grows, you keep adding production buildings and you keep making more and more and more and more units. Scouting is number one. If you notice that at any point your opponent is not making any more units, you need to slowly start working towards castle. Because even if you're doing well and you're holding, if the opponent reaches that point where they upgrade your units and now they're castle your feudal, you might die. So scout. And the option number two, now this is also probably even riskier than fast castle, but you can do this, and this is heavily dependent on the spawn. This is the response you will be going about 90% of the time. And if at any point you see that your opponent stops making units, you need to cut making units and you need to put villagers from wood to gold, and you need to age up as well. So remember how I said if you're playing feudal against 2TC, you have two options, right? Which is to super all in, or to make some units and do castle. As a 2TC player, you're responding to that thing with the same response, except you need to scout and realize when you need to age up too. The second choice that you might have when you're playing 2TC against Feudal All-In is to simply go for fast castle. Now, similar to 2TC versus fast castle build, you can do 2TC into fast age up. You can do the same thing against Feudal All-In. Obviously, it is riskier, but 2TC, if you have, let's say, TC on the deer, right? Which is very important. Doing any 2TC build, having TC on the deer is very important. And then you do fast castle. This does not work with every civilization, so if you're playing like Abbasid, I would probably not advise you to do this. But if you're playing Order of the Dragon or even HRE, I'm sure there's more civs, but nothing comes to mind, you can do 2TC into fast castle. The reason for that is, let's say the opponent is all-inning you as English and you're playing OTD and HRE or HRE. They're all-inning you. They're going to take a while to build up a RAM. You know, you have emergency repairs. They're going to take, you know, they got to upgrade this, they got to upgrade that, they got to make a RAM. You can always try to kill the RAMs. You can emergency repair and stuff. And then you hit castle with burger, either H or OTD, and then you can instantly start producing a lot of units and try to hold that. Obviously, some civs, this just simply does not work. But you can still try it and see what you can do. This can also work with English, this kind of style, because once the white tower is up, you're basically immune to dying. But getting there might cost you a couple of villagers. So that's it. Next one is how to play against Feudal All-In as fast castle. So you're fast castle in this case, so how to play against it. Now, as previously mentioned, from the other point of view, when you're fast castling, there's two real options, I would say. If you really want a fast castle and that is your goal. Option number one is naked fast castle. What does this mean? Naked fast castle refers not to you being in your room all naked, having your butt cheeks on the chair. This refers to not building any units. So this would be HRE fast castle with a tower on their gold. You upgraded arrow slits, you got no production buildings, you're going castle. That's naked castle. And this is something that Japanese can do as well, OTD, HRE, and so on and so forth. So this also is something that Ayubi does. So you can do naked fast castle, and then you can build a 1 or 2 towers. 2 towers is safe. It prevents your opponent from doing the tower thing that I mentioned earlier. And then you age up and you go for, you know, men-at-arms or knights. And then you try to... Fuck, I butchered it. Whatever, you know what I mean. Knights. So that's option number one. Now, I would advise you to do this when you have a really good spawn. Now, what I mean by really good spawn is basically your gold being in the back. It's also map dependent, But if you have gold in the back, it actually becomes exponentially harder for your opponent to all-in you, and you can get away with greedier stuff like this. Because the opponent not only needs to travel further, they need to go all the way around your main TC, so sometimes people will accidentally run into your main TC with the army. They have to constantly re-rally stuff, send units around, and it just buys you enough time to age up. Option number 1. Option number 2, and one thing to be very wary about, by the way, is the only time I would suggest you to do this is, number 1, if you're very experienced. Number 2, if opponent is not all-inning, which in this case you are getting Feudal All-In. And very important, if you have enough food. So if you find like 3 sheep, this will not work. You're just going to die if you try to do fast castle, because you will reach maybe fast castle and then run out of food and die. So this is something you want to do against Feudal All-Ins if your gold is in the back and if you have enough food. And if you can get away with it, you're going to have a great time. Second option is still a fast castle, and you've probably seen this on my stream and other streams, where the player does go for fast castle, but maybe there's a little barracks, right? There's a little racks. Maybe there's, 5, 6 spears, and maybe there's a little plus tower. So what does this do? Well, suddenly, if the opponent does make a ram, or the opponent does make a couple of knights to harass you, you have spearmen. So this becomes a lot harder for your opponent to engage into, and it becomes a lot more problematic. So you might be like, well, isn't that always just better? Well, that depends on a lot of things. It depends on which civilization your opponent is, depends what your civ is in the first place. This is definitely a safer way to do it. The downside of it is you are delaying your fast castle. So the problem with this is, if you're doing this and the opponent still forces idle time on you, you actually might run out of food on the way to castle, and you might be kind of screwed. So the whole point of fast castle builds is you want to fast castle as fast as possible while not dying, in order to produce knights if you don't have access to them in feudal, or in order to produce man-at-arms or something like that. Now, there's some maps that have deer close to your town center, within your town center range, and those maps are the best for fast castles. So if you guys remember map Altai or Dale, those maps are notorious for fast castling civs, because not only you have extra food, you have deer as your main starting food, so getting to fast castle is extremely easy and extremely good. So again, depending what map you're playing, depending which civ you're playing against, you can choose between these two. Both are viable, both are good. Try both, see which one you like. For example, when Byzantine goes fast castle, which Byzantine does go fast castle sometimes, what Byzantine does is they're not rushing fast castle with 0 units. What they end up doing is they go for a grand winery landmark, they gather berries, and then they go for 2 sets of longbows as mercenaries, but they actually don't produce any units like Limitanei or archers or horsemen, and then they do fast castle. So that's kind of this version where you make some units, but you make very efficient units or something that's not going to cost you a lot in order to defend yourself a little bit, and then you go for the age up. And then last but not least, we have Feudal All-In from your opponent versus Feudal from... Oh, my pen just ran out of ink there, you see that? That's a butchered Feudal. So, this one is a mirror, and obviously, what do you do? This is all about food. Feudal All-Ins versus Feudal All-Ins is all about food, okay? As long as you have food and the opponent does not have food, you win the game. It's as simple as that. So, how does this work? I'm trying to think. The general rule is, if you have knights, okay, I'm just going to put K. If you have knights and the opponent has also knights, it's just a knight versus knight battle. That's all it's just knights versus knights. Now, again, if you ask, well, shouldn't you be making some spearmen? Remember when I was talking about Castle Rush versus Castle Rush? Why people go for mass knights and not go for knight spearmen? It's the same thing here that applies in feudal versus feudal, except you're not fighting over relics, you're fighting over food. So every time opponent goes on food, if you have more knights, you can just raid their food. thus getting more knights and getting further ahead. So if you're playing French and your opponent is JD, this is something you guys, I'm sure, have seen. French versus French, JD versus JD, French versus JD is always knights versus knights, okay? And the reason it's knights versus knights is because of this reason right here. If you're playing English versus English, right, you're making both longbows. So longbows versus longbows. Why? Well, you don't need to make spearmen, right, because there's no cavalry, it's just longbows. And if you go for horsemen, you will actually get outmassed by longbows, and the longbows will kill your horsemen. So all of these matchups, doesn't matter what matchup you're doing, whether it's HRA versus French or French versus JD, they all revolve around food, and if you can deny your opponent food. If you're playing French or you're playing a Knight Civ, you're usually dictating the tempo. So the Knight Civ will always, like 99% of the time, go for knights plus archers. And you, as the opponent, right, you can either respond by doing like, well, the only option you have is you have to go spearmen plus horsemen, right? Or you can go spearmen plus archers yourself. And it just comes down to micro, who's going to be able to micro better. Now, what's strength and weakness for both is knight plus archer combo is technically stronger, but it requires a lot more micro, and if you lose any knights, it's a complete disaster, and you have potential to raid your opponent because you have cavalry. The strength of spearman plus horseman or spearman plus archer. Spearman plus horseman is very similar to this because spearmen are slow, archers are slow, and you can raid with your horsemen. The advantage of spearman plus horseman versus this is you have way more units, and your army is very easy to micro. You just A move, and the knight archer guy has to break their hands microing. And then spearman plus archers is you have insane massive units, but you're very susceptible to raids, and you can't really raid your opponent at all, but in the main fights, it's very easy to just overwhelm your opponent and straight up win the game. So, feudal versus feudal, you just gotta commit to it. If you're in it, you gotta win it. And just focus on denying the opponents. Once the opponent runs out of sheep, you wanna deny the deer, you wanna deny the board, deny the berries. They can produce units, you win the game, congrats. The second option in feudal versus feudal, so this is like full babooning, like just going for your opponent. There's the second option, which is you're doing a feudal all-in, but maybe you're not confident in playing knights versus archers. In that case, you can do something like, instead of committing to feudal full-on fighting, you do produce units, you are defending, right? But you're not really looking to stay in feudal forever. What you are looking for is to secure, so you're looking to secure food and then get away from the feudal age. So you're looking to secure food, make army, enough to defend and not die, and then go castle. So if you manage to do this is something that's popular at the pro level quite a bit. So the example of this would be, we're both making food, the enemy's pushing, you're defending left, you're defending right, you have a lot of units, and the moment you get a couple of good engagements, you kill a couple of knights, you kill a couple of archers, then you can be like, you know what, I can just put towers, or tower, start writing totter. You can put a tower or two, right, on your gold, right, 1 or 2 towers on gold, and suddenly, because you killed a couple of units, you got some good trades, you're actually ahead in army. You secured the food, whether with towers or you did some kind of walling to secure deer on the map. And then you go into castle. And once you go castle, it is very similar to the one we talked about previously, where you have a big army. Let's say the army supply right now is 60 for your opponent versus you have 45 or 40, let's say 40. So the opponent clearly will beat you in an open field, right? If you met in the middle, he will absolutely butcher your army. But because you are fighting around TC, you're fighting around tower, right? It becomes a lot harder for him to engage. And this puts your opponent, trailing again, this puts opponent into a very uncomfortable position to where they either have to all-in you, right? Because you're about to get all the upgrades and then your army is better. So suddenly your army is going to beat his army, or the opponent has to go back and age up themselves. If the opponent does that, then you can try to get some relics. If the opponent does all in you, as long as you hold, you will be good to go. And the drilling continues. And that's pretty much it. I hope you guys learned something new. I've been kind of thinking about making this video for a couple of weeks now. I know it seems like we're in a class, but I think maybe putting it in Paint is better for you guys visually, even though I'm literally writing with my mouse. But I figured this is a good way to present it visually and hopefully get everyone to kind of maybe have a little bit better understanding what to do if you're playing eco build, tech build, or army build, and then give you all the variations, kind of what your goals are, what you want to do, and the potential outcomes that you can do. So if you're watching this on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. Check me out on Twitch. I'm probably live right now. And if you're watching on Twitch, let's keep going.